First of all, I want to say good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 39th CALLERLAB Convention here in Nashville. And today is April 2nd, Monday, and this is the effective teaching session. My name is Jerry Reed. I'm from Rockledge, Florida. I started calling in 1978 and joined CALLERLAB in 1983.
Weren't you in Smokey and the Bandit?
I was definitely in Smokey and the Bandit, and I just love running over motorcycles. I believe that teaching is extremely important. One of the most important things that we do, and I believe it should be fun for both the instructor and the students. And I believe this is true no matter what the subject is that's being taught. With me on the panel today, we have Dottie Welch and Tom Sellner. Dottie is from Halifax, area of Nova Scotia, Canada. She was a math teacher for 25 years, junior high through university. Dottie's been calling for 29 years. Calls beginners to challenge and also contras. She joined CALLERLAB in 1995, sorry. Dottie has been chairman of the Choreographic Applications Committee since 2004. A nice hand for Dottie. Tom is from Columbia, Maryland. He started dancing in 1962 while he was a junior in high school. He started calling in 1964. He shared teaching and calling for Teen Square Club in Witkin, Maryland, and also Q's Round. Does that mean sharing or shared?
No.
You still
I
was okay. And he also Q's Rounds, which is very important as well. Tom was in the Air Force from December 56 to December of 1970. He joined CALLERLAB in 1977. He started teaching caller schools in 1986, and a nice hand for Tom. I will also mention that Dottie is involved with caller training as well, and they will both bring their perspective to this subject, and I know that they will provide us some good information. And as soon as I find, there's the rest of my notes. I love this paperless society that we live in these days. I'll start everything off. I'm just going to do some brief comments, and then I'll turn it over to Dottie and do a presentation. And we would like you to hold your questions until the end of the presentation, each presentation, unless there's something that is burningly important that you don't understand or you really need an explanation at the time. But if not, it kind of disrupts the flow if we have questions in between. So when Dottie's done, if you got questions, I'll do that, and then Tom will do his. Teaching is the transfer of knowledge from the instructor to the student. Effective teaching is accomplishing this transfer efficiently. It has been said that teaching is one of the most important jobs that we as callers can do, and I totally agree with that. It has also been said that teaching can be one of the most difficult and the most rewarding jobs that we do as CALLERLAB, as callers. And I agree with that totally as well. Many of us simply teach the way we were taught, without thinking about the different and sometimes challenging aspects of teaching other people to square dance or to improve their square dancing. Research has revealed that different people learn in several different ways. I've named these learning styles. In my handout, I define and provide more information about how I define these learning styles. I explain how people learn, provide a brief explanation, examples of each learning style, and emphasize that an instructor needs to employ more than one learning style to any class that we're teaching. And again, this is because different people learn in different ways. We hope to help you become a more effective and efficient instructor. The handout also describes 4 different learning styles. And I encourage you to read the handout closely. These 4 I've named: observing or watching, listening, reading, and doing. Learning to do something is very different from learning to know something. Generally, learning to do something requires the student to actually perform the action being taught. This is very apropos to square dancing. In my experience, I had one dancer who told me that he had completely learned to dance by reading the books and the definitions, and that's how he learned to square dance. I couldn't argue with him because he was quite an accomplished dancer, although I suspect that he became accomplished dancing by actually dancing. Learning to dance. The students are primarily learning to do something. This requires the students to do error-free practice. If they learn it incorrectly, it takes a lot longer to unteach their wrong performance and then to teach them to do it properly. One of the classes I was teaching, I had a gentleman he was a retired farmer and just loved the activity. He said because he got to meet a lot of ladies, so he was 70 and just having a good time. I was talking to him one time. I said, "John, practice makes perfect." And he said, he says to me, "That's not quite right, Jerry. Perfect practice makes perfect." So we want to make sure that the practice that we give the dancers is in fact error-free or perfect practice. And as I've said before, some people learn better from one method than another. So it's important to use different styles. I encourage you also, each time you're ready to teach a class or to workshop something, that you get the definitions and read the definition for whatever it is that you're going to be teaching or workshopping on any particular night. Daryl McMillan just mentioned in there that at a dance that he was calling, one of the callers came up and said, I don't think that's really the definition of the call. And Daryl said, I didn't argue with him. And he said it was a good thing because he did look up the definition, and the definition had changed since the last time he reviewed them. So it's a very good idea to review those definitions before we teach them. Okay, any questions, comments about so far? Hearing none. Welcome, Dottie Welch. One more important housekeeping thing. The session is being recorded, so if you have a question, we need to get you on the microphone. Unfortunately, this wireless microphone, does not work. So we have 2 wired mics. So if you have a question, we would ask that you approach the table and get your question on tape. Thank you. Here's Dottie.
All right. Good afternoon. What's going on here? Yes. Test 1. 1, 2. Test 1. Okay, we're caught here. Can we have a little bit more wire somehow? Watch the setup here. All right, we're gaining. All right, so I come into this effective teaching with a lot of information that I learned over the years because I was a math teacher, and more information that I learned over the years because I attended presentations similar to this by some of our esteemed predecessors. And Jerry talks about observing, listening, reading, and doing. And in my mind, I would kind of separate the observing, listening, and reading from the doing. Because in order to teach someone how to do something, they either have to observe, listen, or read. They don't get to do the doing unless the way it's presented is something that gets it into their head what they're supposed to be doing. No doubt about the fact that they have to do. But the question is, how do we get them to do that error-free practice? Now, on the learning styles for dancing sheet, that is among my 3, I'm going to start with that one. Way back when I was in graduate school, and I will say that much of this has come into existence as theories about learning styles since I graduated from university. So these are new concepts about teaching and about how people learn. So way back, they talked about various types of motivation, and this is an issue that's relevant to square dancing. The claim was, and I think it's true, some people are motivated by achievement. Their desire is to achieve some goal. Some people are motivated by power. They want to obtain power or status as a consequence of whatever they're doing. And some people are motivated by social reasons. They desire to enhance their social recognition, be part of the group, and be accepted. So, I think this is particularly relevant to callers. We need to be asking ourselves, what is our motivation for being a caller? And how might that influence the way you present things and the way you interact with your dancers? And you need to remember that whichever one it is that you are, there's 2 other things that also motivate people. So you may not think about something the same way they do. And that can be very relevant when you're on a committee and your functions are different. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we have the Gray-Gork model of learning styles. And they split, so learning styles. We talk about this word learning styles in several different contexts here. I tried to separate them out as much as I could, but that term learning styles turns up alarmingly frequently and with different connotations. So bear with us and try to sort out the different things. These are different theories that people have about what's important. So think about yourself, perception-wise. Are you a concrete person or an abstract person? The mind that's most comfortable registering information directly through the 5 senses of smell, touch, taste, and hearing and sight is concrete. Prefers to deal with the tangible and obvious, as opposed to the abstract mind, most comfortable using the intellect to conceive ideas and using your intuition and imagination. Okay, how many think they're concrete? How many think they're abstract? And in no case are you going to be entirely one thing or the other, okay? But you might tend towards one or the other. And then there's the ordering. Do you do this in a sequential way, organize information in a linear step-by-step manner? Or do you prefer to organize information by chunks in no particular sequence? How many are sequential? How many are random? And there's no right or wrong here. It's just the way you are. And the important thing here is that as a teacher, you need to recognize that some people are going to think about things very differently than you do. And you have to then find a way and understand as best you can what they're thinking and find a way to talk in their language. That's the challenge. Okay, so if we put these 2 pairs of things together, we can get concrete sequential people. They want facts. They work step by step. They pay attention to details. Now that's all relevant in the way you present a call when you're teaching it. Concrete random person, they learn only what is necessary. They use insight and instinct. That's a bit of a different kind of presentation. Abstract sequential, they gather data and then they decide how they think things should go. They use logical reasoning. They want an opportunity for analysis. In other words, they look more deeply. They want to really understand what's going on. And then the abstract random, they want broad general principles, and they're willing to ask for advice. There's other things here, read them through, but that gives you a sense of, okay, I probably have in my class, if you've got 12 or so people, or a class and club, or whatever you're doing, some people in each of those categories. And you need to take that into consideration in how you teach them. And I will talk a little bit later about the consequences of these different things. Right now I'm just kind of going through the different possibilities. Then on the next page we come to the classic, what I think of as the classic, and I know CALLERLAB has talked about this many times over the years. We have visual learners, primarily gather information by sight. They tend to say, I see what you're describing. So they're telling you in their vocabulary what kind of a learner they are. Then there's the auditory learners. They gather information by hearing, and they tend to say, I hear what you're saying. And then there's the kinesthetic tactile learners, and they primarily gather information through touch and movement. Now, for teaching square dancing, that is particularly important because you can explain to a visual learner or to an auditory learner the definition, and they, if you do a decent job at describing it, they should be able to extrapolate, okay, if I'm in this position, it's going to be the same kind of deal if I'm facing the other wall in the same position. Whereas the kinesthetic tactile learner is not very good at doing that. They need to experience the call facing this wall, experience the call facing that wall, experience the call facing that wall, because to them, all of those are different. And particularly if it's a call where there's some facing out and some facing in, they need to experience the facing out and the facing in version, or whatever differences there might be. Notice that we have 65% of the population are visual, approximately, 30% are auditory, and only 5% are kinesthetic. Believe me, if you have a kinesthetic dancer among your class, you should know it. And you probably will recognize it. And you may recognize it as thinking, why are they having so much trouble with this call? Then you should be saying to yourself, what am I doing that could be confusing a kinesthetic learner? Am I doing it over here and then over there and then over there in a random way? Because to me that's not confusing. And leaving them so befuddled because they're not getting to do it in one position enough times to learn it that they're just struggling. All right. And by the way, they will all learn. And they'll learn much better if we can teach them in the way they learn the best. So how many think they're visual learners? I am. How many think they're auditory? And how many think they're kinesthetic? Okay. So, you know what I'm talking about. And as we go, as we get further along, those of you that are different, so to speak, than most of us, please help us understand what you're thinking and what you're seeing and what you have trouble with. Yeah, just a second here. Where's the mic? Come up and can we?
This one won't work.
So we're down to one.
We're down to one microphone.
All right.
It occurred, Fred Walker. It occurs to me that some of the calls on the mainstream plus or whatever lifts that we're charged with imparting that knowledge about may lend themselves to these same different styles. For example, do-si-do, if they see it, it's back to back, it's no hands, it's forward and to the left. But then you come to a call like the circulate family where the definition itself says, circulate to an invisible spot in front of you or around the corner.
There definitely are some calls that are going to be easier to teach to one kind of learner than another. And I will address that as we go along. At the moment, I'm trying to get these various categories out there so that we can then talk about, well, how do we deal with this fact? So, those three are very relevant to what we do as teachers of square dancing. And then finally, there's the Witkin model of approaches to understanding, which splits people into two categories, the analytic and the global. This is the newest of them all in my mind in terms of what I learned, and I've discovered that it's very important. It's something that we need to be taking into consideration. The analytic learner focuses on details, works on one thing at a time, wants a way to evaluate quality, and wants to correct mistakes. Versus the global person who focuses on the overall picture, does several things at once, avoids individual competition, and takes criticism personally. Well, The last two things are definitely things you need to be aware of. And you probably, if you're sensitive to your class, you're probably already aware that you don't really want to criticize this person because they're going to get upset. Whereas that person's quite comfortable if you say, you should be over there or turn around or whatever. And that's something that you need to know. Because you can find a way to help them without singling them out if they don't like to be singled out. Also, at the beginning of your description, now I'm an analytical learner. When a caller gets up to teach me something and they rattle on for a minute about, you're going to do this and this and this and then blah, da, 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 my mind is just going, why is he doing this? I don't want to know this right now. He's doing it because he's a global teacher. Okay? At the end, yes, I want to see that summary, but not at the beginning. And the other flip side of the coin is, I wouldn't tend to give that description at the start, except for the fact that I now know there are people out there that want to hear it. And it's my job to give it to them at the beginning, teach the call, and give it to them at the end. We all have the ability to set aside whatever it is that is not what we want. And I will speak to that as far as handouts are concerned. You have from me a lot of handouts. That's because I am an analytical learner. I, as a learner, want to sit out there with a piece of paper in front of me knowing what's written on it. Because otherwise, I'm going to take copious notes. That's what I want to learn from. And it's my opinion that, well, if you don't want the notes that I presented to you, that's fine. Nothing lost. You've got an extra piece of paper. But if you don't have it and you want it, then you're frustrated. So we have all these things. And in addition to that, there's other little issues like concentration. You can look at these. Sound, light, heat. Are you hungry? Is it not in your peak performance time? What's the phase of the moon? All of those little subtle things that can disrupt your concentration. And there's also physical differences. The left-handed person versus the right-handed person. How is that going to influence how they do turns and how they deal with their calls? You know how many of our calls turn the man to the right? A lot. So what happens to the lefty? He has to learn to overcome that. The male versus female. What expectations have been imposed by society? The tall versus short. Well, think about some of our really tall guys and some of our really short ladies. The short lady has an entirely different vision of the universe than the tall guy. And that needs to be compensated for in the sense that you can't say, look at so-and-so back there, because she can't see. So she has to have another way to do that call. Age differences, energy levels, senses impaired, all those issues need to be aware. And the active versus sedentary lifestyle, how long should your tip be? How old are your dancers? How much energy have they got? How energetic are they? How energetic should the music be? All those issues need to be considered. So, successful teachers reach students by learning how they learn. Observe the conditions that lead to success. Listen to the way a person communicates. Experiment with various approaches. Focus on strengths. And learn to recognize various learning styles. And likewise, successful learners do certain things. They understand the underlying idea, strive to understand the underlying idea so they can get it into a chunk, which I'll talk about in a minute. They translate whatever directions we give them into their own personal set of words or pictures or feel. And a good learner, over the years, will develop a strategy to deal with the fact that the incoming information may not be in the format that they prefer. So they have to change it over. Everybody needs to review frequently, group-like things together so the knowledge can be transferred. Use a known concept to get a related skill. Differentiate similar concepts, and as Jerry said, very important, experience error-free practice and avoid repeating mistakes. So, that's learning styles. Now, I've got one here on cognitive limits and making it easier. This came from a paper that John Sobalski wrote. I've shortened it down. His was quite long and complicated. The big thing here is short-term memory. The claim is 5 to 7 chunks in short-term memory at once. So that might be the call definition, the current part of the call, the next part of the call, and listening for the following call. Well, that's 4. If you overload them with the next command, before they've sorted out those 4, then you're starting to fill their brain right up to the brim, and they can't deal with it. However, as a dancer learns a call, they tend to chunk things together. So when you first start doing right and left through, you're saying, right hand, walk by, dodge the shoulder, let go of the hand, reach this one out, courtesy turn, which way do I turn, where do I end up, all kinds of little steps here. But every one of you doesn't think like that. You just say right and left through and you do it. Because you've chunked that action into one cohesive unit after practice. So, new dancers tend to fumble a bit. They tend to be slower because they've got to process the bits and pieces. 5 decisions per second. What do we ask dancers to do? 1 second between our command and they begin executing. You can't put too many decisions in that 1 second. Sense of rightness. I'm sure you've all thought about that. We know that do touch a quarter, boys run from a 0 box. Dancers are expecting facing lines that are normal. And if you call it from some other position and you end up with them half sashayed, there is a great tendency to make it normal. At the very least, you need to give encouraging words to let them know that it's okay. You're not supposed to be normal. Body flow. If it's awkward, they get in trouble. Unexpected formation or arrangement. They tend to get in trouble. That raises the degree of difficulty way up. Less often heard calls. Oh, digging in the back of their memory. What was that? We didn't do that for the last month. Problems. Those are all things that make things difficult. Anticipation. If I say swing through, what's the other possibility? Spin the top, right and left through. That's going to be the anticipation. So if you don't want them to anticipate with a right and left through, you've got to get out the next command early enough so they can adjust that expectation to what you've just called. Clues from the senses. They expect good body flow. A good experienced dancer will learn to make formations, so they have tactile confirmation of what they've done. Visual clues by watching the other dancers in the square. Obtaining audio clues by listening to the caller's prompts or cues, if you'd like, if he sees or she sees something going awry on the square. So you want to call to avoid these limits. Use appropriate timing. Give additional time if you've got insufficient face or slippery floors or some other issue. Give clear and concise calls. Intermix difficult with easier so you don't get memory overload. Be aware of a sense of rightness and minimize the time in the odd formations. Make reassuring noises. Right. So last thing here. Please do read through the other things that I've got there. I will say that Jerry and I were taken a little bit by surprise here. We prepared our presentation before we found out that Tom was on the panel. And so there's a bit more stuff here than we had otherwise expected to present. All right, the last one is the teaching itself. And Jerry's already kind of talked about some of the stuff that's at the beginning here. I put this here because it's kind of my interpretation and you might want to read through it, but he's looked at a lot of the same thing. Consider teaching order when you pick the next call. Analyze the call as to exactly what it does, hands, styling, what's the definition, all the things that are on the call analysis sheets. Think ahead of time about how you're going to teach it and how you're going to address all these different kinds of learning styles that are out there. Because you can easily describe what's good for you, the way you think about it. But you have to think about how to describe it for someone who has a different way of looking at it. Prepare choreography, quick get-ins, quick resolution, because you want success. Plan drills from the positions that you expect them to be able to dance. I don't know how many times I've had a caller carefully teach us some call. And then he says, okay, we're going to do a singing call. Oops, I'm not where he just taught me. Do I succeed? Well, maybe, and maybe not, because it was the unexpected. Dancer, and then there's the presentation process here. They need to be warmed up. They need to have the foundations for the new call. What time of night do you work on it? They say peak is during the third tip. Certainly avoid big challenges late in the evening. What music do you choose? I want something that's non-evasive, but is a steady beat, smooth dancing, so that they get the feel of moving to the music right from the start and all the time. And I try not to talk any more than I have to. I'd rather have a little bit described and they're moving, and a little bit described and then they're moving. To teach all those things that I've said, and I'm going to give an example, so I'm going to leave that for the moment. Error-free practice, and then reteach the next week. Review the third week, and reteach some more. Make sure that every call you've taught gets adequately drilled and doesn't sit on the shelf unused, because then you have to reteach it all over again. So, very last thing here, and you might want to put a square on the floor so we can see what's happening. I need the whole square. Can we get a square since we've got this room rearranged? No, it's okay.
We asked that the best dancers in the convention attend this meeting, and we're glad to see that actually happened.
All right, last one's coming.
Watch out for the camera on the side of it.
All right, so we want that global description. Heads towards us. The next call is square through. This is a 4-person call, and we will begin with the heads working in a box in the middle of the set. That's as far as I want to go with a global description at this point. There'll be more later. All right, each of the dancers in the box will be walking along the sides of a small square. So I'm trying to associate an action with a name. So that square, I'm explaining why we're calling this square. From this position, men will be moving clockwise. Now notice I said from this position. So that's not always the case, but in this position, that's what's going to happen here. From this position, they'll be moving clockwise and girls counterclockwise. And each time you meet another dancer, you will pull by using alternate hands. So that's a little bit more global picture. Heads, take note of your corner. You will be facing them when the call is complete, and that's if we do the whole square through 4. So that sets up a known ending. They know where they're going. And that gives a visual learner a goal. Okay? Heads, with the opposite dancer, right hand pull by, making sure to let go just as your shoulders pass. That is square through 1. Heads turn in 1/4 towards the active dancer beside you in the middle. And with the person you're now facing, who happens to be your original partner, left hand pull by. And that is square through 2, or also known as half square through. Notice that I'm saying turn in and pull by. I'm not saying pull by and turn in, because we know that the ending of square through is the pull by. All right? Heads turn in 1/4 towards the center again. Boys are turning right, girls are turning left. So I'm trying to give everybody as much information as I can, and that helps the tactile learner. And with the person you are now facing, right hand's pull by. That's the alternate hand. And that's square through 3 or 3/4. And you should now be facing out toward the head walls. So, am I where she says? Yes. Good. Now complete the square through 4 by turning in once more and pulling by with your original partner. And you're now facing your corner, as said. Bow to your corner and back out at home. So now I can do the sides right off the bat, so you haven't sat stood too long, and you get a chance to feel what this is like. And I add some of the things that over the years other people have suggested that should feel like a small wrong way right and left grand with squared off corners, and imagine driving around the block. Those are both images that I've heard people use. So fine, if that helps, I'll pass that along. And I would do the same thing with sides square through 4. You've heard it. Would be the repeat. Thank you for standing up here. On the back side, I've listed a few drills that I might use to fulfill that requirement of looking at the different positions, and a few singing call figures that I also might use. I'm going to stop here and pass this back so Tom will have his chance.
Thank you, Dottie. Any questions, comments for Dottie? Yes, sir, in the back. And you have to come up here and apologize. You don't have to run. Just.
Do you, Jerry Help, Cincinnati, Ohio, I think. Same as you, Jerry. Do you talk about what the sides do when the heads square through?
I probably would if I saw the movie.
Sides usually back out, and as they finish their square through, they move up. And sometimes they move out, but they never move back up. And the other thing I wanted for you was, do you ever think of teaching the incorrect ways to avoid doing some of those things? Because if you have angels in a group, sometimes the angel will pull somebody over the side and say, here's the way you really do it. So you have double teaching going. So my theory is show how it shouldn't be done and how it should be done.
Thank you, Jerry. There's a couple of things I do with that one. One is in Florida, we dance hands down. So sometimes I'll show a do-sa-do to a ocean wave, hands up, because when you go dancing in nationals, other places, you're going to experience the hands up, just to let them know. But I also let them know when they get out in the real world, in Florida at least, it's going to be hands down. And sometimes I'll show the Hungarian swing, or whatever they call it, for the do-sa-do, Highland fling, and tell them that they might be able to experience that, just to show what might happen as well. Any other questions, comments? Okay, and here's Tom.
I'll do a more practical. The first thing we have to do, and when we have any dance, it doesn't matter whether we're doing a first nighter, we're teaching our class, or my advanced group just came. They must get in the hall. It's the most important thing. I will not be successful that night for several tips if I can't get those people in the hall. They must be listening to me. And so when I do some of the harder teaches, I actually get them away from their partners and their corners so they can't talk to them. Very, very important thing about that. Also, when I'm beginning to do a first nighter or first night of dancing, whether it's my class or even a group I've never taught before, or I'm calling a dance someplace, I must get them to get familiar where they're at. I introduce them to their corners, to their partners, because when I say element left, I want them to find their corner. And if they're all messed up, guess what? If they can find their corner, well, they won anyway. So that's always a good thing. So when I'm very start with class, I spend the first couple of minutes doing, first thing is to get them to dance. If it's a first nighter, I must get them to dance to music. So the very first thing I do is I put the music on. Then I get people in the circle usually. And I do not care what the circle looks like. I'll just tell them to get in the circle. That way they don't have to ask somebody to dance if they've never been there, if it's a singles or whatever, and they just come out on the floor. And I circle left and right. I have the men walk in the middle and back so they get, and the ladies too, so they get identification. They see the different parts that the different people are playing already. And then I just have them, I also do circle left and circle right. And I have found that some callers in the past have ignored circle right. I was calling, we have class level type dances where the callers will have all the classes together. So about 4th, 5th week, I'm calling the very first one of the year. So I get done with the first tip and there's murmurings. I said, what did I teach that I wasn't supposed to call? And I found out I had called circle right. And they, after 5 weeks, had not circled right in some cases. And that's kind of appalling to me, actually. So don't be in a hurry to go to the next thing. Just think about that your dancers have to experience rotation left and rotation right, because it's in all our calls, right? Think about when you're going around the different calls. We have a rotation to the right, which is very often what the men experience mostly. The ladies have a lot of left rotation. And we have to sometimes get the men to rotate to the left and ladies rotate to the right. And we want to balance that somewhat so that we have that experience of everybody being able to do anything. So at the very beginning, I also want them to be able to, so I'm doing my first nighter. I'm circling right, drop hands, walk single file. Men step up beside a lady. You might have to move forward. You might have to move back. Shake right hands with somebody and introduce yourself. Join your left hands underneath and keep walking. I have not stopped the dancers. They have been dancing for the entire time. And now I said, keep that lady on your right, back out and circle left. And I reintroduce them. I have them face their corner, face their partner. All those things, bow to your partner, face. And then I might present do-so-do just to give them something. Now I'm starting to get in the meat of what I'm going to do. And then shake hands again and promenade. So we haven't done anything very progressive. And no matter what learning style they have, I haven't violated any of those things that Dottie talked about, which are very, very important. Very, very simple. It doesn't matter who I'm talking to. If I've got doctors and nurses out there and professors, I have to get them to pay attention to me, and it's very difficult. So I don't want them to stop and start thinking about, well, let's see, did I do that surgery right today? You just don't want them doing that. So I don't give them the time to think about that. And then I will do what was called Southern Circle as opposed to Sicilian. Sicilian, you pass through. I have one couple. If I have a couple I know, I'll say, George, take your partner and step in front of the next couple to your right. And I have them keep going around like that. And I have them reintroduce themselves to those people. Put the social, very important thing, social. And I'll do do-so-dos. And now I'm able to introduce stars right away. So now I get to play right and left. Very important. And I do that somewhat. And I may have had swing and I might not. It depends on who's there, what's going on for the night, whether I think I'll be able to make squares right away in the next tip. All those things are under my consideration. How many dancers do I have out there? Could be I can't do the Sicilian circle. I only have enough people to make 2 squares. So less than 8 circles aren't such a good idea. Or I don't have enough room. I'm doing a first nighter at a small building. And it's impossible to make a big circle. So we have to be flexible in how we do this. And then when I get into the squares, the other thing is, when I do this, I also have to think about my age group. Do we have only older dancers? Do I have only younger dancers? Or do I have children? It makes a huge difference about how I'm going to do this. And I have to make that consideration. The other thing that I found out, because I call in the Washington, D.C. area, we have a lot of embassy, a lot of foreign people. Do they even understand English? Because I may have people out there that don't understand English. And if I find after the first tip of my first nighter that they're not responding well, and I go around and find that the people walked in are speaking mostly Chinese, that's why it isn't going so well. So I have to back up and know that I have to demonstrate most everything that I'm going to do, even the simplest thing, because they're not going to understand anything I'm saying except they can do the action that I show them. So those are all considerations. Also, since I've taught blind dancers and people who have difficulty in hearing, how does a blind person get to do that call? You think about it. Is your explanation good enough so that you can tell somebody who can't see how to do that call? And if you don't think so, you might want to rewrite all the things, explanations you have, so that would be a factor. And I found that the blind dancer will dance better than the other dancers because they just do what you told them to do. They don't see anybody else or any obstacles. They just take those steps. You tell them to turn right, turn left, they'll do that. And when you have circulates, guess what? They can get there, believe it or not. They need to know whether it's a column or or if ocean waves, because it'll make a difference at how far they have to go on the ends. If they're facing out of an ocean wave, they'll need to know that they have to go around. And they'll have a sense of that. And the other thing that I do in the very beginning on my first nighter is hands. If the dancers are holding hands and do that, they'll do almost anything to prevent you. If I go out and call a dance in Denver, say, the first thing I'm doing in the very first sequence I call, I'll usually say if it's a new dance and I have never seen these people, circle left. I want to see whether they're walking in time to music, and when I say circle right, are they circling right for me, or are they stumbling? Are they holding hands? Heads lead to the right, circle up forward, break and make a line. How many of those couples out there are still holding on to that line? And how many aren't? It's rather important. These are the skills that I want to transfer in my class also. So the definition of a line for me is people holding hands. And I need to emphasize all those little points as I teach class. If I don't, my dance will suffer always. Now, if I'm teaching square through, I teach it with four men. And that means that I don't have to worry about whether they've done right and left through or not, because it doesn't matter. And I also, I like different methods, but I originally taught four. I've had other thoughts since I've heard many people talk, and some of the methods I haven't used myself, but I'll describe in a minute. But the four hands is great. All I have to do is have the head man face his corner and pass through with each other and square your sets. And then I can walk through the four hands. But I always go out and demonstrate first, which doesn't help the blind person very much, of course, and I put the table out there, but the blind person can picture that table. They can understand that they can walk on four sides of a table. So it makes a very clear picture for them. And the other thing I do before I teach square through is I've taught wrong way grand. Think about it. Why would I do that? Because I have the rotation that's actually square through, don't I? If I'm doing wrong way grand, that's a normal square through. And I don't have to have the corners, right? I've had the experience going in the opposite direction, the same as if they were doing square through. And I've done that for a couple of weeks. So now I'm not teaching them a new body flow, right? So if I can, with any call I'm thinking about teaching in the future, think of some way to have the body flow before I teach the call, then I'm going to be very successful. And I'll have less explanation to make, and they'll be very, very much more successful. The other thing I really believe in is swinging. I know a lot of dancers, callers are kind of down on swinging. It's not because of the swinging, it's because of the twirl that people do afterwards that it's the most problem. But I find, because I have back problems, that I no longer can square dance because people pull on me, it hurts. But you know what? I can swing just fine. Doesn't bother me at all. So I know that it's not the swinging that's the problem, it's the twirls that are bad. Now, when you get older and you have dizziness sometimes, that's a problem with your older dancers. The other thing, talking about older dancers, is look at who's at your first nighter. Are your couples in the 70s and 80s been married 40, 50, 60 years? Guess what? They may have never experienced dancing with somebody else other than their spouse. So on the first couple of weeks of your either your first nighter or your class, you want to be very careful about changing partners and very careful about what you do when their partner is not with them, right? Because you have jealousy, believe it or not, yeah. You have all those factors, and the mere fact that they're very insecure. If you've been only with your partner and you tend to be an inclusive couple, you don't go out much, you're in the house all the time. Sit across the room or next to your partner is what you do all the time, right? Now I'm sending that lady or that man all the way across that square, and you believe me, across the square is a real long distance to them. So it's kind of important that I give them a comfort level. And that's the other thing that's very important. I must make the dancers comfortable. If I make them uncomfortable, they have stopped listening to me. Not only that, they're probably not doing what I want them to call, whether or not. So no matter whether I'm calling my first nighter, I'm calling C1. Doesn't matter. If I've got the C1 dancers uncomfortable, they're not doing that dance, believe me. And I'm in a lot of trouble. So the most important thing that I do, if people are doing a sequence and they're breaking down and having trouble, I dance their feet. Going back to the first thing I want the dancers to do is dance to the music, because that's what we have. If I have them dancing, they will go through with body flow through the next call. So if I use good body flow, I have at least a 50% chance that even if they don't know the call, they might make it. So it's rather important that my dance flow and that they know what the flow is. Les Gocher would always start calling in the old days with walk around your corner, seesaw your, I actually have a recording here I was going to play, but we don't have a lot of time. But anyway, he did two things. The caller found out, himself, it reinforced the fact who the corner was. If he was a pure sight caller. So he wanted to know, reinforce in his own mind who the corners was and what the partner was. By doing that, he automatically thought about where he was, and he wouldn't say, oh, who was corner after all? So it's good for the caller, and it's good for the dancers. And being sure that that partner knows who the corner is, because if they break down, they can find their corner. I still won. Very important. Sorry, I have to look at my notes because we didn't get in much presentation ahead of time, so we've changed our presentations quite a bit to deal with each other. Okay. Now, I always teach courtesy turn separately. Pass through, and I teach courtesy turn. Even before I teach ladies chain or whatever. What we used to do is in first nighters in the old days, we only had 17 calls, by the way, years ago. And that's when I learned to dance. I got 5 whole lessons, and we got a 6th lesson because we were going to festival, and we had to bone up and have that extra stuff. Imagine. Well, it would be nice to do that today. So, let's see, I lost my train of thought already. Okay. So when I teach grand square, for instance, if the boys will start with their left foot, it turns out, and the lady with the right, and if they're round dancers, they'll do this naturally because that's what they do all the time. They will do all 4 feet. After a while, if you go, especially if you're doing a dance that's not yours, and you go out, how many people are dancing grand square 3 steps and then turning, right? On the 3rd step. It helps. Believe me, it helps. Then. Also, with the right and left through, then when I teach circulate, I can teach circulate pretty soon because all I have to do, once I've taught heads lead to the right or something like that, and that's not very far along on the list, I can teach circulate because they're out in some kind of formation. If I have the heads lead to the right and circle to a line, walk 8 to the middle and back, and just a side couple's California twirl. Well, the side couple could do that because the lady's hand is free, right? She's on the end of the line. Now I have a 2-face line. And I can have the couple circulate once and twice. Not only that, I was in a 0 line, wasn't I? If I want to stop to teach right there, all I have to do is say, swing your partner, promenade home. So that's the other thing I want to do when I teach anything. The first time I teach it, I want the resolution to be there. The dancers don't care about how fancy my choreography is at that point when I'm teaching all the way through classes. They don't really care. They just want to dance. So why should I put myself out on a limb and say, how am I going to get out of this? I shouldn't do that. Every teach I make, and it doesn't matter whether I'm teaching challenge or what level, I need an easy get out, so I have a bailout point. I want bailout points wherever, and that's even in the very beginning. And when you do a first nighter, you shouldn't have to sight call at all. You should be able to do that, just stand there. The other thing is, don't call off a computer screen and look at the computer screen while you're teaching, because you cannot see what those dancers are doing. There's no way that you can concentrate. I need to know how well they did those square throughs. Whether the dive through, what happened? Did the outside couple California twirl after, during the dive through? What happened? And then if I have angels, I need to know whether my angels are helping too much. Because if they do, then the dancers aren't learning. In fact, angels keep me a lot of times from knowing how well my dancers dances because they cover up the mistakes. And I really, really need to know, did they really learn that tonight? And I won't really know necessarily unless I'm able to observe them directly and without the angels. So I only have sparing angels. And I always tell the angels, don't help them. Just dance. Be in your position. I tell them, if you've done a square through, you get to the end. And the other thing we do with hands, put that hand out there and let the other person come. Man's right, lady's left. And just stand there and let the person use the vacuum system and fill the hole. And when you're teaching, you have to give that little extra time for the first couple of times. But then you need to call in time. Because if you don't, then what are the dancers are going to do? They're going to lollygag to the call, right? Especially if it's a long one, square through 4. Let's see. And half of them are done, and half the time, and the others are still coming, right? So you must insist, and I do this from the very beginning of my first nighter, I insist that everybody is moving with time and music. And when Challenge first came out and I started calling Challenge, we danced Challenge at normal tempo. All the way through. It didn't matter. It was the same thing. It's just another level added on to what we were doing. We just, same thing. And the easy things to do with the formations now. Suppose I'm teaching my class and I'm just started it, right? And the very first night, I can get them in lines. All I have to do is say heads, face your partner, back away, join the sides. Join hands on them, got 4 hands. Explain that line means that they all have to have their hands joined. Lines walk into the mat. Lines roar into the middle back. They get a little excitement out of that. Your corner's beside you, face your corner, bow to your corner. Face your partner, wave to her, run home, swing your partner. Very simple, nothing happened. I do that with the sides. Then I can build on that. I get them in the line again, and then I have them walk through. Now, if it's the first nighter, I haven't done pass-through. I am only doing walk-through. Simple English. Turn around, walk into the middle. Now they've had a half-sashayed line, and they've had a normal line, all in a first nighter. So this is the experience that I'm going to use later on, because I want them to be in these positions comfortably, so that when I do a call that leaves them in a position that not normal, they've already been there. Very, very important. And the simple things for simple things. I had a couple of points on Dottie's. I wanted to make a couple of comments. Since I teach I had blind dancers in my class. The only thing that you have to do when you have blind dancers really is clear explanations, and you've got to get the other dancers to dance properly. They must hold their formations because the blind people can find them as long as they dance right. So taking hands is something you should emphasize like every night for weeks into your, every time you see that they're not holding hands, tell them, hold those hands. Also, if I'm calling a dance and it's a C1 dance and I do something and make a line and I know that I don't have a line, I said, I'm going to have a long night. This dance is going to be terrible because they're not holding hands in their challenge lines. I'm in big trouble because they're going to dance only 50% of what I call and they're not going to like me. So that's not good. Okay. When I do wheel and deal, I always teach it from 2 face lines first because it's simple, right? You wheel toward the center. Pretty simple. Blind people don't have actually much trouble doing wheel and deal, but you have to do a little explanation, which will may help the other friends. So if I've got lines, then because somebody is holding on to that dancer, that blind person can do it because they're being sent there. And a little incentive with normal lines, at first I can do some things that I wouldn't probably tell normally, is that who's the couple on the right-hand side and who's the couple on the left? And where is the center of the line? Suppose you're out there and you're blind. Where is the center of your line? Where's the end of your line? Well, if I have my hands joined on both sides, I'm in the center of the line. If I don't, I have one hand free, then I should be the end. Well, if the dancers are not holding hands in their lines, blind person doesn't know that. So also, the blind person can tell from normal couples whether they're on the right end of the line or left end of the line, because the lady is going to have a free hand, and she knows she'll be on the right, so she'll go in first. And if on the other side, the man knows that he has the free hand, that he's the couple that's going to go in second, so he has to take that little step forward before he wheels in, so even though he can't see the other couple, he'll be able to do that. The other thing is, you might also have blind dancers. Deaf dancers. Or pretty much deaf. So they only hear half or a third of what you're saying. So they must watch the other people. Well, if the other people do not dance well, it doesn't work. The other real problem we have is for sighted dancers is the hall. Believe it or not, dancing with these walls, and we use them in teaching, right, all the time. What happens the very first time that your dancers dance in an oval hall? Trouble, huh? So when I do that, I always look for the caller stand, and I orient all my dancing as a dancer on them. So I tell my dancers this and get them to know. The other way you get to practice this is have the dancers promenade and purposely wheel around so that their lines are not lined up with the walls. So these are the kind of things that you like to give to your class so that they have the experience. If they've had the experience, then when they have the oval hall, it won't be a problem. I don't know what our time is, so I'm going to stop because I've probably been talking too long.
Any questions or comments for Tom? Sure.
All right. I just want to comment on the blind and the deaf. We have a blind dancer in our area, and the one thing that she's never danced with me on a regular basis, so I see her periodically, and the one thing that she has not mastered and that would have to be taught, and it's something that a sighted dancer doesn't have to learn, is am I in the wave so that I'm facing out, or I am in the wave so that I'm facing in? And the only way she can do the circulates is if the person beside her says, "You're facing out," or "You're facing in," because she doesn't have that visual global picture of the square. And the other thing is she always asks the caller to please not weave the ring, but rather use grand right and left to give her that hand security as she goes around the square. But aside from those two things, she's a very good dancer. So that's possible. And I will also share, I called once, Canadian National, and one of the other callers said to me, "Do you see that guy down there who's watching you all the time?" He was deaf. He was lip reading. If you can imagine, he was lip reading the caller. So, okay, I wouldn't have thought that was possible, but it was advanced and he was doing fine.
Very good. Yes, sir. Who you are and where you're from?
Okay. Dale Hoppers, Los Angeles, California. I had a girl who had macular implants in her ears. And my calling style, I walk around the floor a lot in my classes on a cordless. And she quit because she couldn't see me.
That is an interesting point, yeah. Okay, a couple of another question. Who you are and where you're from?
Carol Beebe, Bristol, Virginia. I have a question that perhaps for Dottie. If I were teaching I have taught square through 4 by getting them in facing couples and saying, right pull by, you've done a square through 1. You turn back, right pull by. You've done a square through 1. They've done it half sashayed. And then I do it, have them you turn back and do a square through 2. You turn back, do a square through 2. They come back home each time. Question is, do they learn? I'm trying to teach them the definition of the call that way, but I'm not reinforcing the feeling of doing it the normal way. What are your comments on that?
If you have a tactile learner, that's going to give them a lot of trouble. If you don't, it might be fine. And by the time you get to square through, you might already have figured that out. But it all depends. And if you see someone is just losing it, then it's the time to back off with doing it from too many different places too fast. They need to see one position and get comfortable with it, and then introduce another.
If you do that, unfortunately, for some of the people, they'll think that U-turn back is part of the call. So you have to be real careful. You're going to say one, and U-turn back every time. So be very careful how you do that. Well, a little better way to do it is in Sicilian, where they do one hand, and they can walk through and go on to the next. So that way they don't have anything associated. Anytime you can disassociate another call from that, the better it'll be.
How many of you are familiar with a document called Standard Applications? All right, good, about half, not quite half. I would encourage each of you to take a look at that document, especially when you're teaching new dancers or even calling to groups you've not called to before, because that will it provides a list of those calls that are heard most often, and the dancers will experience nearly 100% success with those. And I believe that teaching those standard applications first is most important to get, because that's what they're going to hear a lot when they get out to dance. Just a couple of wrap-up things. I would encourage you to go on the CALLERLAB website. There's a couple of documents on there that I think they're very important. One is Teaching Techniques. That's a paper I put together several years ago. It's posted on the website. And also a couple of documents, Teaching Tips. We have Teaching Tips for Mainstream, and we have Teaching Tips for Plus. These were collected over at CALLERLAB conventions, and we got input from everybody in the room, and these documents are very good. Gives you some words to use or some techniques, some tips to use when you're teaching. When I teach, I teach the first night. I will introduce a call and review and dance during that night. The next night we come back, I will reintroduce that call as if they had not heard it before at all. And then we'll review and dance during that night. The next week, we will review instead of reintroduce. We'll review a few less helping words, dance and review. And then the fourth night, just call it. Call it cold and see how they do. If they stumble or anything like that, then, reintroduce or some more helping words. But Bill Peters always talked about that as talk it, walk it, and dance it. So those are the things that will reinforce over a period of time. I think we're just about at the end of our... Oh, one of the other... Dottie had mentioned a paper from John Sobalski, and he talked a lot about chunks, how we learn things in chunks. And like Dottie said, with a right and left through, when we first learn it, you got to concentrate. It's a right pull by, it's a reach out, it's a courtesy turn. But after we've done that, if you're a dancer, maybe 10 or 15 times. If you're a caller, maybe 100, 150 times. Thank you. I'm just checking to see if you're listening. But after we do that so often, it becomes instead of right pull by, reach out, courtesy turn, all of those different pieces, it becomes one chunk of information. So the dancers hear right and left through, they recall one chunk and they do it. I'm sure that you have all had the experience where a dancer will come up to you and say, you know that call where you turn with this hand and then the centers do that and you say, right and left through? No, that's not it. And you say, spin the top? Yeah, that's it. Because they've stored all of that stuff as one chunk of information. They can kind of remember like bits and pieces. And then they say, oh man, I should remember that. And I said, no, you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to remember one chunk of information and do it all at one time.
By the way,
the original paper that John Sobalski wrote, if you do a Google search, you can find it. It's out there. So if you want to see what he actually wrote, go ahead.
And all of our handbooks, or all of our handouts, should be on that CD that you got in your package. So you should have all of that. One last note.
Okay, on the bottom of my sheet, I wanted you to look at it before we start. When you're doing your classes, don't be afraid to be slightly inventive, because you want them to get more than the standard positions. You don't want to give them too much, but I have some interesting grand squares where the heads are doing grand square, where the sides are doing some very simple things. And you can see them at the bottom of your sheets. You can do these kind of things. You don't have to don't be hard, be interesting. And if you can, and you want to do that in your class, don't bore your class. If they need a little interest, put the little, don't be afraid to do that, but don't kill them either. You just have to ride that little thing that's, okay, they're learning, they're happy, they're smiling, they're not bored. If you do that, you'll be very successful.
I think as I said at the very beginning, teaching is very important, probably, in my opinion, one of the most important things that we do. I believe it should be fun for not only for the student, but for the instructor as well. And believe me, when the students will be able to pick up on your feelings if you're bored with what you're doing. So, whatever you can do to make it interesting for yourself and for the dancers. Not difficult, just fun. Keep it fun. Any other questions, comments? We thank you very much for being at the convention and for coming to the convention. Thank you to Dottie and to Tom. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks a lot.